Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Hunt at Water, and I'm here with my colleagues Diane New and Annalie Martin, and our co-chair for today, Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza, who is in Massachusetts. And I'm grateful to all of them for the work that has gone into preparing this. I'm also grateful in advance for our four speakers who have agreed to make very brief comments this afternoon, this morning. I'm just going to start saying today, because for some of you, it's already morning in the Philippines and in Australia. And for some of you, it's soon to be, or it is evening. Or for some of us, it's late afternoon. And for others, it's still kind of midday. So let's just say today and call it that. I'm going to invite you to take a moment of silence together to recall those we have lost this year. This Feminist Liberation Theologians Network has met for the last 24 years. And I think it's quite amazing to think that we have been, some of us have been together and some of us have been at every one of those meetings. And so we've lost people this year, not just in our network, but around the world. There's also enormous injustice and suffering that many people face, which is why we do the work that we do in order to eradicate that. So let's just take 1 minute to ground ourselves in this lovely opportunity we have to meet, and then we'll begin our program. Thank you. Thank you very much. And again, for those who are just joining us, I'm Mary Hunt at Water with my colleagues, and this is the Feminist Liberation Theologians meeting, and it is focused today on feminist liberation theologies on the ground, acting when we are in extremis. And I think we could get a consensus around the world that we are, in fact, in extremis. And I must admit that last year in San Diego, when we met as a Feminist Liberation Theologians Network, it never occurred to me that this year would play out as it has. A global pandemic, economic problems beginning with joblessness and food scarcity and homelessness for so many. But here we are for the 24th meeting of this group. We usually meet in conjunction with the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature annual meeting, which is an event that many of us attend. But this year, because AAR SBL participants have to pay a fee to register, we wanted to avoid that. So we decided to have our meeting prior to the AAR SBL so that everyone would be welcome, as has always been our policy as the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network. So we decided to go on our own. And in fact, in the good company of the American Academy of Religion Women's Caucus, and several of that group's leaders are here with us today. Elizabeth Earthich, are you with us yet? And if you are, would you identify yourself? It's time for you to give greetings. Elizabeth, are you with us? Unmute your phone and offer your greetings. Any sign of Elizabeth? If not, we will dispense with Elizabeth's greetings, and I will simply say that the caucus has always been, and not always, but in the last 10 years or so, been a great colleague for us insofar as we have been able to jointly program some of our sessions. And so there will be some sessions in the official meetings of the AAR SBL that include caucus members and caucus projects. We will not have a response to this meeting at that AAR SBL meeting with the caucus, but we hope next year that we'll be back on solid footing and all of us will be able to meet once again, and the caucus and the FLTN will be able to work together. So without Elizabeth, I'll simply say thank you to the caucus, and we will hopefully resume our collaboration with them as planned next year. As Elizabeth and I can well remember, the idea of this network began in 1995, and the annual meetings of the SBL AAR in 1997 have always been the venue for our gatherings. We started that one in San Francisco, Elizabeth, in 1997, And we have been meeting faithfully, and I would say fruitfully ever since, this being the 24th meeting with no signs of slowing down. We're expecting almost 100 people on this call today. There is a Google list, which you can get on during the year. We keep the list, and most of you are on it, and we send things out periodically that I hope you find helpful. We assume you want to be on the Google list if you attend the meeting, unless we're told otherwise, but please feel free to use it to post relevant issues and articles and events in your situation. FLTN is sponsored by WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual, and WATER is supported by people like you. We believe in socializing resources, and we believe that among us there is enough, so we do not charge a fee for our programs. However, we do invite those who are able to donate to WATER as they can. Our donors are very generous, and we need those donations. But if you are a person whose circumstances do not allow, you are more than welcome at any and every WATER program, again, knowing that among us there's enough. You can look at our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org, for other WATER programs. Let me begin then in earnest with our program for today. 2 years ago, the Feminist Liberation Theologians group looked at economics, global and local intertwined, a feminist liberation theology priority. So economics was our focus. And then we discussed implications of economic injustice, and it became obvious that climate change and related ecological matters were linked to resources. And in fact, we needed to look at those. So last year, we looked at worldwide climate change, feminist liberation theological perspectives. And all of these meetings, by the way, are on our website in video or audio form, and you're welcome to find them there. We also have a printed report about each meeting, which you're welcome to request. You'll get one from this after we finish. So once COVID hit, it became clear that economic issues and global climate change play central roles in how the pandemic is playing out worldwide. So today we look at feminist liberation theologies on the ground, acting when we are in extremis. And we had to come up with our title some months ago, but I don't think our situation has changed. We simply are in a more difficult situation, some people more than others. So it's an opportunity to learn with each other what's happening and how we can bring, and this is the key, how we can bring the unique theological and ethical perspectives that feminist liberation theologians have to the mix. And to that end, I'll simply state our agenda. We usually go around the circle. Those of you who've been at these meetings, remember we go around the circle and everybody says their name. Well, guess what? We're not going to do that today. We're too many and the medium does not allow. So what we'll do is instead, as I have invited you already, to rename yourself so that we can see if we go through the circle ourselves. I can see someone from Dublin, Ireland, and I can see someone from Buffalo, New York, and I can see someone from Australia. So let us know that in your renaming. And then when we have small group opportunities to chat, you will have a chance to introduce yourself to several other people. So that's how we're going to do it this year. And I apologize because I know that's always a very favorite part of this meeting for people to hear see who's sitting next to them or who's around, but I think it's really prohibitive given our medium. So what we will do is instead we will move immediately into our conversation with our four speakers, and Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza will introduce them. And then we will have an opportunity once they finish their remarks to have a small group conversation where you will have interaction with people. And those are absolutely random. So you may be with four other people from your country, or you may be with no one from your region. Absolutely no way of telling. It's all luck of the draw. So again, I want to welcome you. I want to say how important I think this work is, especially in this moment, which I have named In Extremis. And we look forward to hearing, at least from our speakers and then from you in your small groups, what the unique perspectives and resources we bring from a feminist liberation theological perspective to the very difficult moment in which we find ourselves as a world. So with that, I turn the chair to Elizabeth Schuster-Fiorenza, who will introduce each of our speakers in turn. And speakers, I will give you a clue in the chat. You'll get a little private message from me if you go over your 6 to 8 minutes. And then if you don't happen to see my message, or you ignore me with the scorn and contempt I so richly deserve for doing it, then I will simply say your name here, and we'll invite you to finish up your remarks, and you'll have more time afterwards. So I know it's not a lot of time, but it's plenty to get a nugget. So Elizabeth, would you be so kind? Thank you. You need to unmute yourself first. Elizabeth, we can't hear you, so you need to unmute.
Are you speaking to me, Elizabeth?
No,
Yes,
but you know, we could, you know, Elizabeth, Elizabeth Schuster-Fiorenza, hold just one second. I already said you would be coming and giving greetings, so I think I'll wait till the end if you don't mind.
That's fine. Well, I send my greetings from the Women's Caucus. That's really all we need to do. We've been together for many years, and we're looking forward to doing a paired session next year. So that's
wonderful.
It. Thank you.
Wonderful. And great to have you, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, I want to say, it turns out that, you know, she sits here very modestly as a feminist liberation theologian, but she's actually a very accomplished musician, and we're going to be using some of her music in the next Water Tea. And I want to just congratulate you on your new CD and the work that you're doing in the musical world. It's amazing to me. Thank you. Great to have you. Elizabeth Schuster-Fiorenza, it's all yours.
Welcome, and I will introduce our speakers alphabetically, and therefore start with Professor Rita Nakashima-Brock. She is the first Asian American woman to earn a doctorate in theology. She is a senior vice president and director of the Shea Moral Inquiry Center at Volunteers of America. A professor for 18 years, she was a fellow at the Harvard Divinity School Center for Values in Public Life. Her publications include the co-authored books, Soul Repair, Recovering from Moral Injury After War, and Saving Paradise, How Christianity Traded Love of this world from crucifixion and empire. Rita, please start.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see so many good friends from many years of this kind of work together. It's a great part of having a long career and getting old is you keep collecting wonderful people in your life. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk in this context of in extremis about the dangers that the US faces of really not being able to recover from what we've been going through because of latent moral injury. And moral injury is when basically your love system collapses because of a moral failure. And that moral failure may be your own failure, it may be another person's failure, it may be something you witnessed or even heard about. And I feel like we've been taking body blow after body blow after body blow that is disruptive of meaning systems. And the price that moral injury takes when that happens is that it comes, the trauma itself comes to define your life, and everything gets responded to and seen through the trauma itself. And without a recovery process from moral injury, it's easy for people to slide into toxic anger, depression, despair, cynicism, and all kinds of things that indicate that your moral meaning system no longer functions. And I just want to outline some of the kinds of moral injury that we're already seeing and will continue to see, I think, aggravated by the fact that the pandemic is now back full bore and worse than ever. And it's like a global war. There's no escaping. There's no safe place that you can go back from a frontier and hide in. It's everywhere. And so that there's a profound kind of anxiety and fear, I think, in a lot of people because it's just really hard to even know how to stay safe, because even if you're taking precautions, your neighbors may not be, or the people that you depend on to deliver your food or take care of you may not be safe either. So that's a terrible state of anxiety to sit in. Not to mention the losses that it's hitting people without the capacity to comfort each other in the normal rituals of lamentation that help us recover from grief. And then the second thing we've been experiencing is this daily barrage of bad news. It's not just the pandemic, it's the fires in the West, it's the relentless hurricanes, the 4 category hurricanes that hit Nicaragua in 2 weeks. Clearly climate change is part of that, but that is a relentless barrage of other risks that people are facing, and the need is great, and people are unemployed, and the economy is having a terrible time. So there's the recovery from all of this is going to take a very long time if we recover. And then there's the thing that happened with the murder of George Floyd, in which the deep racism in the society, the systemic racism that was easy if you weren't victim of it to sort of not notice, just became so blatantly obvious that the entire world got upset. It wasn't just the people in the United States. There was a 5,000 person march in Dublin, and marches around the world on behalf of the murder of what happened to George Floyd, and new conversations about race around the planet. And it launched the largest social movement in American history, the most diverse social movement in American history, in the middle of a pandemic, which is a sort of astonishing thing. But it's a lot of pent-up frustration, and it remains to be seen how sustainable that will be now that the pandemic has gotten even worse. But I have hopes that that may be the one bright light in the process of where we are that may have lasting impact to change all the historical injustices that it sort of lifted the lid on, and sort of forced people to see, because there was no sports to watch on TV and nothing to distract us from the terrible news. People had to see it. And then there's the trust in institutions that has been shattered. The United States has experienced an inept, incompetent, and I think criminal administration that has often made a lot of people cynical about government. And that is the worst thing that could have happened from the last 4 years, is we need the government to create some sort of system that we all agree to run our lives and create a just society. And right now we know we can't trust those institutions. It's a terrible place to be, on top of every other uncertainty. And betrayal by that government of all the principles that we did have some good principles in our democracy, and they've all been violated. An independent Justice Department, laws that protected people that had been attempts to stop voting, and all of that. So there's a major break in trust, and mistrust is a major piece of moral injury. So there's a way in which our faith in whatever faith we might have had in institutions is at high risk, and we can't rebuild a society if people don't trust its institutions. And so I think these are serious aspects of moral injury, and we have to find a way to come together and begin to process all the pain that we've been carrying around moral injury. And at Volunteers of America, this is the area I work in, and we began trying to help healthcare workers, which was one of the first populations that was hit by moral injury because of the pandemic, to give them a chance online to relieve moral distress and stay resilient. But it's a long process, and one of the major institutions in our society at deep risk of melting down is our own healthcare system, because so many healthcare workers are thinking of leaving healthcare or killing themselves. So I think what we're living through is the classic definition of an apocalypse. And I'll leave it at that. The unveiling of all kinds of horrible things.
Thank you very much, Rita. We're left with our mouths open. Apocalypse. Please feel free to use the chat. There will be small group time. There will be a plenary to bring together some themes to hear from other people as well. So Elizabeth, would you introduce our next speaker, please? Thanks, Rita.
Dr. Mary Condren is a former research associate at Harvard Divinity School, where she did as a PhD in religion, gender, and culture. I think she was the first one there. She is director of the non-profit educational company Women's Spirit Ireland and a research fellow in the Center for Gender and Women's Studies at Trinity College in Dublin. Her critical work concerns the role of violence and the discourse of sacrifice in contemporary politics. Dr. Condren's constructive work focuses on recuperating the indigenous female traditions of old Europe in Ireland.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Lovely to see you again and to meet some people for the first time and to meet and to regroup with people I haven't met in some time. And thank you, Rita, for your presentation. When you talk about apocalypse, we in Ireland, experienced apocalypse for 30 years when we had a civil war here in Ireland. And that has profoundly shaped my own thinking about theology and what we need to do in order to change our mindsets and the discourses around faith and religion. So I speak tonight partly as a director of Women's Spirit Ireland, but also I'm not claiming to speak on their behalf, but I will be speaking a little bit about some of the work we've been doing over the past 25 years since we were founded. Ireland has experienced the COVID the same way as everybody else. We're at level 5 here at the moment. We've had 2,000 deaths, which is huge for a small country like ours. And it has affected the factory workers, the healthcare workers, the elderly, and people in nursing homes. So how do we begin to talk about, or how can we offer something into the discourse that might, from a faith perspective, offer something a little bit more hopeful? Given what we experienced in Ireland for over 35 years, certainly when I went back to theology, I had two concerns. One was to critique the theologies of sacrifice, which are, in my understanding, inherently violent and toxic. And the second thing was to recuperate the indigenous traditions of Ireland, and particularly in relation to the old European traditions. I did that originally through my book, which I wrote when I should have been writing my doctorate. And sorry, Elizabeth, but there we are. That's what happened. And in particular, then also, I've been working on recuperating a theology of mercy. And what does that mean in the 8 minutes that I have? For one thing, what we're trying to do is to rename and reframe words. For instance, in our rituals, we never talk about an altar. We talk about the hearthstone, because that's where the ancestors lived. That was the place where everybody went. We don't talk about the blood of sacrifice, but we do talk about the dew of mercy. And the dew of mercy is what is collected at the quarterly festivals from the dew of the earth. And I've also found many references to the dew in the Hebrew Bible. We don't talk about the sacred, we talk about the holy, because sacred implies sacrality and profanity. And we don't talk about the goddess either. We talk about the Cailleach. The Cailleach is the veiled or the mysterious one. She who shaped the landscape from her enormous cloak. But most of all, we don't talk about monotheism, because Ireland is a nation of poets. And we do talk about the Cailleach. And the Cailleach takes the form of a triple spiral, which represents the cyclical turn of the seasons, and the return to the Great Mother. Now, what I mean by that is the language of divinity does not refer to one person. It refers to manifestations of divinity at different times of the year. For instance, in wintertime, the Cailleach hibernates and is pregnant. She shakes her cloak with which she has shaped the landscape. She throws her double axe. One side of the axe brings life, the other side brings death, and she throws it under the holly tree so that nothing can grow. But then in springtime, she emerges in another form, in the form of Bridget. The snowdrops appear and the new lambs frolic in the fields, providing sheep's milk, which of course is the origin of the word in bulk. The people make crosses, including Bridget's crosses, some of them making for their neighbors, and take them to people with whom they may have fallen out, saying, "Thank God it is Bridget's Day." In other words, it's a kind of a jubilee, a way of saying, okay, it's Bridget's Day, we can start again. The women make a basket and welcome the Breedo, which is baby Bridget, into their homes. And Lasser, the light woman or the midwife, she presides over the ceremony using the kris or the birthing bell so that everyone can pass through it, regenerating themselves for the coming year. At Bealtaine, which is the 1st of May, we then arrive with the Inyin Bui, or the daughter of the hag. She's the young maiden who comes into her own, blossoming with the flowers. In August, we have Latiran, and they're the mother rains looking after the harvest and distributing its fruits. And we found that in the places where the fairs are held, there are places where there are spindle seats. And there's some evidence to suggest that that's where the women gave out the laws at the 1st of August at the major fairs. And so part of our thinking is to recuperate some of those traditions. But in the final part, when we go into winter, all the three figures, in other words, Bridget and the Inyin Bui, or the daughter of the hag, and Latiran, go back into the mother because she is the center. And that's why the triple spiral is so central for Irish culture. And so they go back into it. And so that's a kind of another form of the Trinity, you know, the 3 in 1, and she is the one. So the cycle reflects both the rhythms of the seasons and also the rhythms of women's lives. And of course, men are also included in those rituals whenever they wish. So what does this have to do with COVID? A young monk once asked St. Anthony, he went to St. Anthony. He was in the dark depths of despair and depression. And he asked him, what could he do when he was in despair? And St. Anthony said, there's only one thing you can do, and that is to keep making your rush mats. And that's what the young monk had to do for the rest of his life. Keep on making your rush mats. There are no heroic answers. The COVID times, I would suggest, are a form of winter time. It's the time for hibernation. It's a winter time of our culture, of the culture that we've all grown up with, but that we can no longer expect to enjoy, if enjoy is the word, because it only applies to a very small portion of the world's population. It's a time for reflection, for meditation. And in wintertime, all activities in the old Indigenous Irish tradition has to cease so that new life can come into being. And the new life, when it comes, doesn't take the form of any great heroics. It takes the form of the snowdrop. The snowdrop. And in the great poem by May Sarton, along the terrace wall, snowdrops have pushed through hard ice, making a pool. Delicate stems now show white bells as though the force, the thrust to flower were nothing at all. Who gives them the power? After a winter's silence, I feel the shock of spring. My breath warms like the sun, melts ice, bursts into song. So when that inner one gives life back, the power to rise up and push through, there's nothing to it. We simply have to do it, as snowdrops know when snowdrops flower. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Condren. You bring us a rich tradition, and you bring us the arts as well. And so we go from Rita's very theopolitical approach to your own historical approach with from apocalypse to poetry. And I think you've both set us up for some very important conversation, and I thank you on behalf of the group. Elizabeth, would you like to go on with the introductions, please?
Yeah, I am happy to introduce Dr. Monica Maher. She is based in Quito, Ecuador, and works throughout Latin America, facilitating workshops, speaking and teaching on women's rights and religion, non-violent action, and trauma resiliency. She directs the peace building program in Latin America of Friends Peace Teams and teaches in the graduate program on gender, violence, and human rights of the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences in Ecuador. She holds a PhD from Union Theological Seminary and an MDiv from Harvard University. Dr. Maher is an ordained UCC minister and a Zen sensei, and the first water intern. I did not know that before. We have such a historic person here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thanks, Mary, for sponsoring this session on Zoom so we could all meet. And it's really an honor to be here. It's great to hear Rita and Mary. As Elizabeth said, I'm based in Quito, but I work across the region, specifically in Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Colombia. And of course, this year has been so challenging with COVID, but also the accompanying pandemics of widespread hunger here, violence against women, militarization of civil society, and most recently, the very destructive hurricanes Eta and Iota, which were powered by climate change and have affected more than 3 million people in Nicaragua, also Honduras, Guatemala, part of Salvador, and Colombia. So the health, economic, and so-called natural disasters have had a disproportionately devastating impact on indigenous and Afro-descendant communities in Latin America, increasing already glaring social disparities. So what have feminist liberation theologies to offer in such a context in extremis? I want to focus on two themes. So it combines with apocalyptic scenes, which the Central Americans definitely have said they're living through now. One is salvation. How do we understand salvation in this context, and also the need for imagination? So the first theme, salvation. Yvonne Gabarra has written of successive salvations, moments of happiness, of freedom, of everyday resurrections, marked by gestures of tenderness. And I would say that such gestures of tenderness today are turning into spontaneous, heroic acts of solidarity, because people are literally saving each other. The myth of an external savior, definitely gone if it was there. There's no more waiting for outside help from governments, clearly revealed now is riddled with corruption. And the slogan has returned with force here: only the people save the people. And I share two stories from feminist liberation theologians in the region. From Chiapas, Mexico, Geraldina Cespedes reports that during Hurricane Eta, she left her house to bring food to neighbors. Walking through her street, which had become a river with water up to her thighs, she suddenly saw a terrible scene. A 9-year-old indigenous girl, Esperanza, struggling and drowning. So Geraldina threw herself into the water, cell phone and all, to save Esperanza, and then carried her home to her mother, who was waiting with 5 other small children in a house that was flooded. And Geraldina emphasizes, technology died, her cell phone, to save human life. And a second story, a recent story, comes from feminist activist theologian Nelly Del Cid of Mercy Dreamweavers of northern Honduras, whose own house filled with water during Hurricane Eta 2 weeks ago. She alerted her social networks that she was trapped at home with her elderly mother and a young woman before her cell phone died. And she was in the water about 6 hours. The water rose above the windows and doors. The lights went out and they prepared for the worst while still struggling to survive. And suddenly a neighborhood boy learning that they were trapped, climbed over a makeshift structure to reach their roof, where he tore open a hole to rescue them. And Nellie cites experiencing her house as a dark, watery wound space from which she was pulled out through a narrow canal in the roof into a world which was filled with daylight and flowing with a current of love. She was so struck by the extreme kindness and care of the young boy who gently massaged her waterlogged legs so she could walk again. Moments of exquisite attention to the fragility of life and death, to the reality of impermanence and radical interconnection. Celebration of life saved and lamentation of that lost has been key to feminist theological activity in the region, with spiritual gatherings of tens, hundreds of friends and family members for wakes, funerals, and other transnational ecumenical interfaith liturgies online when there's internet. Nellie lost her house and everything in it, and it was actually flooded again by the Hurricane Iota this week, as with her whole neighborhood. And she went back to see it, and she said she couldn't keep the tears from flowing. She said it was apocalyptic. And she's now temporarily living with her sisters and has immediately begun reaching out to others, both in her immediate neighborhood who are in shelters, making breakfast, and also through national women's rights networks to Indigenous women, Tolupan women cut off and without food. And most crops have also been destroyed. So the extravagant generosity spirals on. The social fabric continually woven and held in place by everyday resurrections, successive salvations, together seemingly invisibly transforming broader social patterns. And my second theme now is imagination, because clearly now more than ever, we need that imaginative impulse of feminist liberation theologies. And I have to admit, when the strict COVID curfews and quarantines began here in March, I met with my colleagues via Zoom from Central America and Colombia to talk about next steps. And we concluded there was nothing we could do. That, we couldn't go out. What were we going to do? And then we began to ask ourselves, what if we could do something? I mean, what would it look like? What would we want to do? So this envisioning allowed us to act. Although we were under very tight legal restrictions and legal punishments if we broke the laws to leave, we were allowed to go out to buy and deliver food. And so we began to prepare peace baskets with food, with medicine, with messages of hope, and emergency phone numbers, especially to women at high risk of violence. And later we added seeds. And then people began vegetable gardens at home. So envisioning unleashes energy of life, and that creativity is contagious. And this creativity has been especially true here in Ecuador with Indigenous women colleagues who immediately moved from food delivery to single-headed households to women in danger to start their own home gardens, and then collective gardens of high protein beans, chochos, and exchange of agricultural products and seeds, an economy based on sharing and collaboration. So imagining another society possible is deeply rooted in ancestral wisdom and memory. And in the Andes, the indigenous cosmological vision is strong, sumat kausai, living well in harmony, reciprocity, and balance, respecting the multiple dimensions of space-time, humans, deities, ancestors, and nature. And yet, under the pandemics, most Latin American countries have been under an extended state of exception, which means that many basic constitutional rights are waived, including the right to assemble in large groups and protest. And so this has facilitated government's ability to take controversial steps, such as conceding additional ancestral territories to extractive industries. But in the face of the huge challenges, a clear call has emerged in indigenous feminist theologians, like Bolivian Aymara leader Sofia Chipan, who reminds us of the long legacy of foremothers who preserved and maintained life. Calls have gone out on What's Up, telling women, especially in Honduras and Guatemala, don't give up. We come from a long legacy of women who have survived and who've preserved life and created it. So there's a call to honor the wisdom of ancestral spiritualities as resources to recreate a world of justice. And with Sophia, there are many other women speaking here in Ecuador, Patricia Golanga, also Lorena Cabnal in Guatemala. When with them, we remember that the feminist struggle for justice is the struggle to defend and preserve land territories, body territories, that ecological violence is a form of violence against women. We proclaim feminist justice as cognitive justice, decolonizing epistemologies to embrace corazonar, thinking with the heart, and sentipensar, feeling, thinking. So corazonar and sentipensar in everything we do, from teaching to ministry, to activism, to speaking on Zoom. In this way of knowing and being and acting together, we can save ourselves and our planet. Yupay Chani, gracias, thank you.
Monica, thank you so very much for adding incredible richness to this conversation. You know, we've had 90 water interns since you, and you set the bar high. You set the bar high. Elizabeth, for our final speaker will be Kath.
Dr. Kathleen McPhillips is a senior lecturer in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Newcastle in Australia. She is a sociologist of religion and gender and employs feminist, psychoanalytic, and sociological frameworks to issues around gender and religious particularity around institutional child sexual abuse in religious organizations. Kathleen has extensive experience in attending, reporting on, and analyzing the Catholic Church at the Royal Commission into Institutional Child Sexual Abuse and has held numerous research grants. Her most recent publications are in Child Abuse and Neglect, Feminist Theology, Journal of Australian Studies, Psychoanalytic Dialogues, and Journal for the Academic Study of Religion. Kathleen?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Mary, for hosting this. It's wonderful to see everybody. It's great to be here. And thank you to the speakers who came before. There's just really powerful accounts there. So I just wanted to say a little bit about what's been happening in Australia and the Pacific region. And I just wanted to take up something that Rita, well, she left off with this very powerful term, apocalypse. And I suppose for Australia, our apocalypse in the last 12 months has been not COVID, but the massive and intense bushfires that raged along the east coast and inland of Australia between June 2019 and May 2020. So they began in Queensland, they spread downwards along the east coast. They burnt out 46 million acres. They destroyed 3,500 homes. 34 people died directly in the fires, but 445 people died from smoke inhalation. There were just hundreds of fires. Some merged together and created mega fires. So it was a massive apocalypse. It caused significant trauma to local communities. And I'm thinking about the comparison here to the Californian wildfires. Nearly 3 billion animals were affected, and some endangered species were without doubt driven to extinction. So there were just terrible environmental impacts. Such high levels of CO2 are emitted that they blew across the Pacific to South America, which was inundated with smoke pollution. There were huge economic impacts. Nearly 80% of all Australians were affected directly or indirectly. Some of you may know Di Rayson, who attends the FLTN meeting sometimes. Her house was under threat for quite some time. One of my friends lost her house. And this time last year, as you remember, we were meeting in San Diego and the fires were burning then. And all of us Australians there were just sort of like pretty concerned, but everybody had a very good awareness of what was happening, which is great. One of the good things was that there was a tremendous response from local and global communities. Millions of dollars were raised to support relief and rebuilding efforts. And then in February this year, there was torrential rain, which made a significant impact on reducing the fires. Of course, the fires are related directly to climate change, although politically that's a contentious issue. In 2008, there was a climate change review which predicted that the bushfire season would start earlier and result in more intense fires. And there have been a number of state-based inquiries that have been held. So, I mean, just as communities they hadn't even begun to recover from the bushfire trauma, COVID hit. And that was the very first case in Australia was late 2020. And one thing that happened in Australia was that the federal government moved very quickly to respond. They saw the impacts in China. They listened to the World Health Organization. But more importantly, they actually listened to the advice of the chief medical officers federally and in the states. And by the end of March, all the Australian borders were closed to non-residents, and there were strict travel restrictions put in place, which are still in place. We can't travel outside of the country. And it's very hard to get back in, leaving quite a few Australians stranded overseas. So social distancing, hygiene rules were introduced, and there was a lockdown across the country, and most of the state borders were closed. And that lockdown in March through to May saved thousands of lives. It caused significant disruption to schooling, business, and the economy, but and lots of people lost their jobs. All of that happened, but the government did introduce emergency payments to individuals and businesses. Banks paused mortgage repayments, etc. So universities had to put teaching online. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. Most campuses were not closed, but were on minimal staffing. Thousands of academics lost their jobs. The international student community was badly affected. And currently the university sector is in a very serious crisis, and more jobs are expected to be lost next year. The government put significant amount of resources into testing and tracing very early on, and first responders were put on alert. As you know, nursing homes were badly affected, and a number of places were the site of multiple deaths and spreads. The first wave was weathered well, and then in May, June, a second wave hit Victoria, particularly bad, and the state went into lockdown, and it's only just come out of lockdown. And the decisions of the Victorian government saved thousands of lives. Although I have to say the Murdoch press worked very hard to destabilise that government, the Victorian government, and in general to destabilise governments across Australia. There have been 28,000 cases of COVID, 25,000 people have recovered. There have been 907 deaths. The majority of those have been in Melbourne. So we have a population in Australia of 25 million. So that's a tenth of the US population. That'll give you an idea. Indigenous communities, particularly in Northern Australia, were heavily protected because they're particularly vulnerable, and there were very few cases amongst those communities. There's currently 94 active cases across the country, and as of 2 days ago, South Australia had begun a severe lockdown for 6 days to deal with an outbreak. So it's really been, Australia has managed the COVID crisis very well. Why? The reasons for that is that the government treated it as a health crisis, took the advice of medical advisors in the community and acted very quickly. And also the Australian population saw the benefits of the short-term sacrifice of the loss of freedom for the greater good. And I think that's been a very big difference to the US, where that ethic of individual freedom, which is such a central value to US culture, that really challenges to that, such as mask wearing and staying at home, have been fought very hard. Whereas Australians seem to trust the government leadership and the medical leadership. And so we acted as a collective, and there were many, many stories of people acting together, caring for each other in local communities. And in that sense, we've experienced ourselves as a community that can come together and can help each other in a time of crisis. So there's been a huge amount of trauma this year, collective trauma from the bushfires, which really were our apocalypse, and then COVID, but there's been some very, very positive outcomes for the nation. So we have been watching the disaster in the US and also in the UK, where things are very drastic and serious. Many of us, I know, feel very deeply for our US colleagues and friends who've had to endure the most frightening and dreadful conditions as really the state falls apart and chaos looms. We all breathed a very deep sigh of relief when Biden and Harris won the election, but I think we all know that the road out of this, as Rita said, is going to be very long and hard. Feminist responses to COVID in particular in Australia have focused on the rise, a significant rise in family violence and gender-based violence, families dealing with lockdown and job losses. Even with government help, women have borne the brunt of the pandemic, losing jobs and managing households. So some of the good things that have been happening across the feminist theological network in Australia is the re-emergence of WATAC, Women in the Australian Church, which is a group that began in the early 1980s, and along with the other great reform movements in and around the church, the Christian churches. It began in October 2009, a private Facebook page, and that developed, and now there are memberships grown. And they have been hosting Zoom sessions and looking at a whole series of issues, including women's leadership and social justice and theology. There was a Women's Church conference, online conference in October 2020. And we'll host a symposium in August 2021 with the theme Women in Communion. There's a podcast planned, and there's also a joint project between the Grail and WATAC. The Plenary Council, which is a council of the Catholic Church, which is going to meet in 2021, it was put off due to COVID, in response to the recommendations from the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse, has been extremely problematic. And the bishops in particular have been, and other church leaders have been managing that agenda very, very carefully and keeping women, especially women with strong voices, out of that discussion. So WATAC is planning a series of events to take place and to coincide with this. And what WATAC's wanting to do is to join with the delegates to model church as a discipleship of equals. A really good thing that's also happening is that we're trying to recover and make available the herstories of reform groups and women in the church, including WATAC, Women Church, and the Movement for the Ordination of Women, which were very powerful in the 1980s and 90s. So all the hard copies, records, publications, and journals of these groups are held at the Jessie Street National Women's Library in Sydney. And I've been working with Tracy McEwen, who's here. Hi, Tracy. And Tracy's been phenomenal in getting WATAC back on its feet and doing a lot of work there. And so Tracy and I have been in touch with the National Women's Library to digitise a lot of the records, and we've just heard that the library is going to support this. So now we're going to seek funds from women's religious groups to undertake that project and make sure that that herstory doesn't get lost and it's available to everybody. Australian Collaborators in Feminist Theology has been running out of the University of Divinity in Melbourne in the last few years, and that's been a great project encouraging feminist theological scholarship. It's run a series of events. It's had guest speakers such as M. Sean Copeland, Serena Jones, and Alana Harris. Anne Elvey, who is the eco-feminist theologian poet who spoke last year at the FLTN meeting, has just published her book, Reading the Magnificat in Australia. Sheffield Phoenix Press. So she's an amazing theologian, a scholar, an activist, and a poet. Very keen to read her work, and we are very lucky to have someone of her caliber writing in Australia. So I'm going to finish there, but thank you, everybody. It's great to be here and hear everyone.
Thank you so much, Kath McPhillips, and I'm so glad to see so many people from Australia who are with us today. Apparently, this breakfast hour is a good time to get some of our Australian friends together. Thank you, Elizabeth, for handling the introductions, and special thanks to Rita Brock and to Mary Condren and to Monica Maher, and of course to Kath McPhillips for these very powerful presentations, one after the other, one dovetailing with the other, showing us some of the trends in terms of what's going on, but also showing us deep variety in various parts of the world. And so we are in your debt, my good sisters, for this work. I'd like to continue the agenda, which is simply that we will move now into small groups for conversation.
People are returning. Awesome.
That was great. That was great.
Good.
You know, Annalee, I've made almost every Feminist Liberation Theologians Network meeting
Really?
since its inception. And
when was its inception? Did they introduce that?
Mary,
I was wondering.
I think it's like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But this one's the best. No, it is, because, you know, who can afford to get to San Diego? Who can afford to get to, the global folks, my session was wonderful. It was just wonderful.
I mean, I was kind of bummed I would have possibly been able to travel to Boston, but you know what? This is better to have it open to everyone this year. And yeah, from the comfort of our homes and our screens.
I wonder if we can keep some component of this. It's not impossible.
Oh, I think that, I think there were, or at least in the breakout room I joined, there was a lot of talk about how we should, because of Zoom and virtual participation, so many more people have been able to access these kind of programs, that we have to be able to keep it this way for people, because we're missing out of a whole section of people that we didn't know were missing out from these events. Yeah. Even just for accessibility reasons, like really shows our like ableism for people who can now participate.
If you're talking about the benefits of having to go online, I think that there are benefits. Pan Autumn, the organization, we just celebrated our 35th anniversary. It's Pacific Asian North American Asian Women in Theology and Ministry. And we were supposed to have an annual conference in the spring, and we went to webinars also. But that meant all of our Asian members who rarely can get to our annual conference are on our webinars. And so we actually had a whole panel of just Asian women talking about Asian networks, Asian women networks in Asia. That was fascinating. And I don't know that we would have ever had that many of them at an annual conference in order to have a panel like that. And we do them at 8 o'clock at night, so that Eastern time, so that the Asian women aren't, it's early morning for them, but I think it is, but they're there.
Well, that's what, I got a few emails from people who, the time, you can't find a time right for everybody because water is just so, and FLTN is just across the globe, but we tried.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for participating in these small group conversations. I'm glad to see some people who have joined us who were not here even for the beginning with the marvelous presentations, which gives me one more opportunity to say that this entire meeting will be put up on our website under Feminist Liberation Theologians, so you'll be able to access it for yourself, for your classes, and for further conversation. That said, I want to recommend that if you came up with something in your group that was really you thought insightful, something that others of us should know about, please put it in the chat. That will help us to glean a number of possible themes that have emerged, allow us to get a better sense of the whole, and it will also help to orient us as we move forward. That said, this is an opportunity to venture some ideas. And so I see some of the best thinkers in the world. I see one person, Susan Thistlethwaite, who writes mystery novels now, talk about imagination. I see Patricia Russell, who's a first-rate liturgist. I see Jennifer Bird, who's just published a bunch of podcasts about marriage of all themes, which we're boasting in the current what we're reading here at Water that'll go up shortly. So there's a lot of, in addition to lots of other people. So there's lots of creativity here. Coralie Ling from Australia has a great source of store of experiences and insights. So the floor is open. Please put anything in the chat that you'd like us to preserve for all eternity and use for our thinking. But the floor is now open. And I'm going to suggest that we keep the floor open for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then we will have our closing announcements, and we will finish well before the 6 o'clock hour, just because it is hard to be on Zoom for too much longer, as in my view. Even though how did you like the breakout groups? Show of hands, did that work out? Did you meet new people? And yeah, it was great. I wanted to be in 5 groups. So the floor is now open, and you can, Annalie, would you tell them how to raise their hands other than the old, what I always call the Catholic school method? Sister, sister, sister. Remember, you said, you'd sort of pound your chest and yell sister with your arm in the air, and then you'd get called on maybe. It's the old Catholic school method, but we have high tech here. So would you, Susan Thistlethwaite has raised her hand. She's got another approach. And Annalie, would you tell people how to do that?
I can try. As we've seen on this video or on the Zoom chat, there are different versions of Zoom. So hopefully this will work for most people. Same as when you can change your name. If you go to participants and next to your name under the pull down menu or at the bottom, there should be a little button that just says raise hand, or your little icon or your mini screen next to your name. As Rita has also just shown, you should be able to raise your hand next to your name on there. I know it's different depending on what kind of device you're on. And so that's why usually this way is the best, or any kind of emoji or in the chat, that helps too. But hopefully that'll reach everyone.
Great, thank you. As the floor is open, what we want to do is hear about what you suggest as trends, as well as any suggestions you have for us as we move forward. I also want to say that after we finish our formal session, I will close us well before 6 o'clock, and then we'll leave the Zoom open so you can stay and hang around and chat with your far-flung friends, and that will be a pleasure as well. So the questioners in the order in which I see them will be Susan Thistlethwaite first, and then Rita Brock, and then June Boyce-Tillman from England. So please go ahead. Susan, I think you're in Southern California as we speak. And
I am.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to compliment the small group. A very stimulating discussion, and thinking about effectively queering the apocalypse. That the binaries that have so defined, let me just speak for Western culture, and its compulsory homophobia it contributes to this contempt for the environment, contempt for the lives of human beings. Let's have the elderly die, because that will speed up the process of getting to herd immunity. In addition to writing fiction, as Mary, I write murder mysteries because it's cheaper than therapy, but I also write columns for the local paper, and my most recent column was called Achieving Herd Stupidity. And that is not going to work. But the group just dug in to the themes of imagination, the themes of apocalypse, and I accidentally pressed the button right as Angela was speaking, because when a button comes up on the screen, I'm old enough to just push it. So I didn't say enough compliments to my small group, but they were fantastic.
Thank you, and I'm sure you speak for all of us who want to thank those in our small groups that we may have had to end before we got an opportunity to do that. But yes, that's the great part of the Feminist Liberation Theologians, is the people that you meet and the ideas that you hear and the commitments that you share. So Susan, thank you, and shameless plug for your next book coming out soon. So watch Water for that. Now we take Rita Brock's question.
Okay, first I have to do this for Sue. This is Sonia Sue. Sue's grandchildren have adopted her.
Every day, my grandchildren ask about this cat. It's just
So I thought you should meet her.
Sonia needs her own blog.
Yeah. So you can tell them you met her in person on Zoom.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead, Rita.
All right. So one of the reasons I just wanted to say, one of the reasons I've been so fascinated with the concept of moral injury, besides its explanatory power, is that it's also a linking concept, and it disrupts the pathologized model, medicalized, individualistic, therapeutic model of mental health, and a whole lot of other things that it disrupts. And so I find myself working with psychiatrists and military people and all kinds of people I never thought I'd be spending time working with, who agree that no one owns that space, that it's a literary concept, it's a religious concept, it's a therapeutic concept, it's an aesthetic concept. But what it also means is that there are a lot of avenues of approach to how one recovers. And so I wanted to thank Mary for following me with all of that beauty, because beauty is one way you can recover from moral injury. It's in poetry, it's in biblical texts, it's in art, it's in human relationships that matter and bring us back into the world with a sense of love.
Thank you. And echoing that, the importance of the arts and of imagination, and the poem that Mary Condren shared is by May Tharton, and we will put it in the final report, so you'll all have that, and you can look for those snowdrops. June Boyce-Tillman will be next from the UK.
Hello, it's been lovely to be with you. I can't usually get to these gatherings. It's wonderful to see people that I have met from time to time. I'm a hymn writer and a musician, and I have visited you, Mary, and
Yes,
Jan,
of course.
a very, very long time ago when I was.
We remember, and we have your books here.
Yes, we do. Good to see you, June.
It's lovely to see you again, and that's what Zoom, I think, makes possible. I just want to give you a small example. I'd been running an interfaith active sharing in Winchester Cathedral, where I was professor at the university there. And we did that for 10 years. We had 400 people, many of the groups led by women, singing and playing from various faiths, schools, community choirs. And in the middle, they were scattered around the cathedral and sang when they thought it was right. So the cathedral mixed the calls to prayer and the children singing. I think to myself, what a wonderful world. A new dean was appointed who said that only Christian prayers should be said in a Christian cathedral. So in effect, we were evicted. We've now been doing this on internet. We've been running a peace choir, which has attracted people from all over the world. At one point, we had Australia, Israel, South Africa, North America, both US and Canada, the UK and Europe. And people, we had a number of chants that work together. Some of you will know that musically, you can't get a shared pulse on the internet, but we work over drones like the Eastern religions do. And people could come in and just improvise when they thought was right from all faiths and bring in whatever they liked. And now we've got in a sense, a cathedral which has no exclusion, so we've got a free space. So I see the internet as from an artist's point of view, a musician's point of view, as a new manifestation of the Holy Spirit to bring together people from across the world in a very free space, often women who are still excluded as much from the musical liturgical traditions as they are from the other bits of the liturgy. And it gives a huge chance to do that. We ran a workshop for people with disabilities, making music, and produced a wonderful piece called The Path Through the Woods, which is finding our way through COVID. and how theology and music combined in that. So for me, it's been a marvelous experience of how to connect people in a new way. People in South Africa, for example, said we've been very separated, and it's so wonderful to come in with the rest of the world. So I know there are the minuses of COVID, and I've been quarantined for a very long time now, but I think Zoom has offered, certainly as a musician, immense possibilities and a huge range of inclusions without people controlling spaces or controlling what is done. So it's really democratized and produced an inclusive platform for new works. At my age, I've been on a steep technological learning curve, but I'm enjoying it.
Wonderful.
I run something, Music, Spirituality and Wellbeing International. And you can look that up at mswinternational.org. And we've got 13 books out now in the series with Peter Lang on music, spirituality and well-being, one being Queering Freedom, music, spirituality, sexuality and well-being, working with, some of you may know, Karen Hendricks and Tonya Smith in Boston, Massachusetts. So that's been possible because of, the Zoom platforms.
Thank you so much, June. It's great to see you again. It's great to have you here, and I hope you will not be a stranger. Other comments? other comments people would like to make. I want to just note that we have people on this Zoom meeting from more than 10 countries and more than 20 states. So I think we have a wide representation of people, but I'm thinking always, as one does as a feminist liberation theologian, about people who have no such access, and how, as wonderful as it is for us, where we are responsible to increase and to broaden and to deepen the access of people who simply are not here, cannot be here, don't have the resources to do this. And so that piece of it. I can also report that we of the Feminist Liberation Theologians Network will probably try to maintain a Zoom component to our meetings going forward, although they will be in person. And I think this is a common thread for a lot of groups, that we've learned, oh, how silly that we have not used technology earlier, better, more frequently to include more people anyway. And so I think this is a good thing going forward. I also see in the chat a lot of people talking about transnational community and the importance of transnational community. And I think that is a very serious outcome of this. We certainly at Water have been experiencing this in the last 9 months, especially through our Water Teas, where we've been gathering like this regularly. So I think transnational community that so many women's religious communities know about, that Indigenous communities certainly have much to teach us about, and that people who are in diaspora, as it were, from their own countries of origin, for whatever reasons it may be, have much to teach. And I think that is a theme of a common theme. So let me open the floor once again for the next people who would like to raise questions. We have about another 8 to 10 minutes for our conversation if we'd like to use them. So please go ahead and suggest what you see as themes or trends and where we might go next. What do we need to do as feminist liberation theologians and company? What do we need to do next?
I think we might consider how we use Zoom in the future.
Do you want to say more about that, Coralie Ling in Australia?
Well, I think as we've heard just from today, but of course for much longer, people have been able to come to this meeting who don't normally come, and we've been able to have wide representation, which is great. And I think that in the future, if there can be a Zoom possibility, that will make the Feminist Liberation Network a wider network.
Yeah, yeah. Without having to lose the in-person. Next year, if all things go well, some of us will meet in San Antonio, Texas, again, AAR SBL connected, but we don't need to. We can certainly just Zoom if that seems to be a better way to go for people. So
Mary, there might be a way to combine the two.
I think so.
With a big screen, so the people that can zoom in are on the big screen with a camera that so they can see the people who are in the room. I think there are technological ways to bring people into a room virtually to the people meeting there, which
Absolutely.
would be interesting to try.
Yet another vote for hybridity. Yes. Go ahead. The floor is open. Annalie, do you have your hand up?
Nope.
It was on the screen. It was up on the screen.
Oh.
I think hybridity is the way forward. I mean, I'm in the group of disabled people with disabilities, and they say we've known this. Welcome to our world. Welcome to our church. You've come and joined us. And I think that notion of looking for spaces which have the possibilities that Rita has outlined, of both meeting in person and the hybridity. I know that some of the churches around us, the church that I serve, has set up that inside, and I think that will make churches, if they're prepared to be open, which they're not all of them, wonderful conference venues for people who do want to do hybrid things, because they've already set themselves up with members of the congregation who can't get there or are quarantined in England, can't go out. So the congregation is almost equally divided now between those who are spaced out in the building. We're locked down completely at the moment in England. So, but we had people in the church and almost an equal number coming in from outside.
Right.
So I think that there's huge possibilities there. And it's
Yes.
about inclusion.
Exactly.
And you're right, Mary, that there are some people who can't do it. But I've just recommended to Wandsworth Council, which is where I live in London, that a lot of our people are seeing that all children have a laptop so that they can
Right.
They should
Thank you.
Everybody over 60.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to move on. We have two more hands up. Colleen Hartung from Wisconsin, and then Hugo Cordova Quero from GTU Berkeley, etc. So please, Colleen, and then Hugo.
So one of the things I've had some experience with, not necessarily because of COVID, but during COVID, was venturing into the whole open access platform, Wikipedia as an open access platform, but also publishing with an open access publishing company. And when we're talking about inclusion and about different ways of doing things, I think it's an interesting conversation to be had. If you think about the difficulty of during COVID and access to knowledge that all of us has shared, you know, difficulties with that experience. Some people in some regions of the country, of the world, that's just the reality of their experience all the time. And so just in terms of feminist ideas and feminist liberation, I think I've been thinking about that a lot, and about the utility of that and how that works. What are the upsides of that? What are the downsides of that? So that would be one thing I'd be thinking about.
Thank you. And do you want to just mention, since you have the floor for the moment, Colleen, do you want to just mention your new book? I think it will have great echo in this group.
Yes, so it just went live on the ATLA Open Access platform, and it's called Claiming Notability for Women Activists in Religion. It's the first in a series that we started on women in religion, their biographies about women, and each monograph in the series will focus on a different aspect or hurdle of getting women represented and the knowledges of women represented in biographical writings. Yeah, it's been a great experience. It's a global project. It's
wonderful.
Go check it out. It's open access, so you don't even have to purchase it.
Great, and we'll put that in the chat. And I want to preface the next comments by saying that Argentine feminist theologian Beatriz Milano Couch is featured in the book, the first woman in Latin America to get a doctorate in theology.
Yep.
Hugo, you're on.
Yeah, I was thinking that one of the things that we have experienced in Latin America is the democratization of access, both at the academy and at church. For example, some of the communities in my church have difficulty to gather every Sunday, because if a family of 4 need to travel every Sunday to the place where we could gather, they have to expend 30 to 45% of their monthly salary just in tickets to get to church, which made them impossible when they have to pay medicine, food, and other daily stuff. So having online services have helped a lot for the people to be present at church. And actually, during this 10 months, our church has grown exponentially 300 times. We have even done ordinations online because we were not able to move, but we were not able to have budget to all together get one place for ordination. So we have to resort to the things that we have. And also at the academy, many people don't have the budget to pay for registration, to pay for a hotel, to pay for food in order to present at a conference. And some of their jobs require them to present. So for many people, this 10 months has been the time of their life to be present at conferences and other academic activities without having to sacrifice a large amount of their salaries and the needs of their life in order to be an academic requirement from their jobs that are not well paid. So I think that this 10 months has been democratizing the access for many people.
Thank you so much. Good to have you with us. Susan Thistlethwaite. Unmute, please. If you could unmute, Susan.
I know we said it in the beginning, but we cannot leave without saying activism on confronting racism in all the contexts, in all the different countries and the locations, our own social locations, those who are being oppressed. Liberation theology confronts, calls for repentance, calls for change. It does not blather about unity and coming together in the absence of a change in the structures that facilitate racism, are growing racism and using it as a vehicle for authoritarian power. Now, we started there. I just didn't want us to finish without naming that again. I put
Absolutely.
it in the notes.
Absolutely. Rita started us there in terms of white supremacy and the need for anti-racism work, and you bring us full circle. I would invite us to look ahead. I'm going to make a couple of announcements and then and just invite us now to look ahead and invite you to put into the chat, just take a minute to put into the chat where you think we need to go as a feminist liberation theology network. Who are some of the people we need to hear from? And what are some of the themes that we need to be looking at as we move forward? And those will inform both what we do next and how we are next. So if you would just take a minute, I'm gonna literally just hold us for 1 minute at this to put into the chat, and we will faithfully report this back to you. So please take a minute and be part of the planning for our future meetings. For meeting number 25, Elizabeth, I think we should have an anniversary. You and I should have an anniversary of our 25th meeting next year.
Mary, what was your question?
My question was really a comment, Elizabeth, more than anything, that 25 years ago we started this, and next year will be the 25th meeting actually of the group. We started actually a few years earlier, but just wondering if not only we should have an anniversary celebration, you and I, but also as we move forward, that's a good moment to say, how does this spin off into something even bigger and better, as it were.
So you mean a review session?
Could be. I wasn't thinking that, but it could be a good idea. I have a feeling that going back to Susan's most recent comment that and Rita's apocalyptic and Mary's art and Monica's telling of incredible stories, that we could be in even deeper weeds a year from now. We could be in a much more difficult situation. And how is it that we will bring the resources that we uniquely bring to this? That's how I'm seeing it, but others will see it otherwise. Anybody else want to comment? Please go ahead. Just unmute yourself and make your comment. Yeah, Nancy Corcoran? No, you're just waving to somebody. Okay. Does anybody see it wildly differently? You think it's going to be great?
Mary, can I just suggest, I mean, I think the 25th anniversary is significant, and I would really like to see something to celebrate that. It's been such an important network for people across the globe, for women across the globe. And I guess maybe I'm just thinking about Mary Condren and Rita's referral to, and some of the other speakers today, about the importance of art and beauty as being absolutely central to healing processes. And I wonder if somehow we might incorporate, if things are going to be more difficult, and indeed they may certainly be, I wonder if that would be a theme that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. We've done that. Do I remember, correct by memory, Katie Geneva Cannon of blessed memory, talking to us about her art? That was a really a magnificent one. You can look back again if you go back a few years in the reports. That there's a report on that. But that I remember that so distinctly. But yes, we need that. Anybody else? Phoebe Knopf is suggesting storytelling in music and art. Phoebe is a poet. Anybody else? A theology
traditionally women have used. Traditionally women have.
Okay, anybody else?
Mary, I'd just like to say the importance of just getting together like this in a, like probably a more informal sense. And like for me personally, you know, being a feminist theologian in Australia can sometimes be quite isolating. The network here is building up. But remembering back to my first meeting back in Boston in 2017, it was just incredibly liberating to, stumble into this room across and meet all these other women who kind of I connected to in a way that I didn't really understand at the time. And I think, being able to just get on and chat in the small groups and listen to, the stories of like the women from across the world, from our speakers, to do that maybe twice a year instead of just once a year would be great.
Yeah, we don't have much going on here at Water. We could certainly imagine.
No,
you're right. You're absolutely right. And I actually thought of that too, Tracy, that there's no reason why we have to do it only once a year, and there's no reason why it has to be connected with AAR-SBL. Especially if people are not going to be able to come to that in the numbers that they have before for the reasons that Hugo and others mentioned of expense. So I think you make a very important point. And we might want to have one session that's purely Zoom and one session that's hybrid. And that would be growth. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was going to suggest the same, that we could have one hybrid and one Zoom.
Great. Well, Water.
Could I just say, Mary, something about, if I may?
Mary Condon, go ahead.
Yeah, there's somebody missing here this evening who has been a hugely important person in all of our lives.
Please go ahead.
In feminist theology as a discipline, and that is Rosemary Radford Ruther. As most of us know, or some of us know, Rosemary is now had a stroke a couple of years ago, and she's in Pilgrim Place, and is very badly affected by the stroke. And I think it would be really wonderful if, those of us who are able to keep in touch with her, to send her cards, just to let her know that she hasn't been dumped by the feminist theological community, that we want to keep in touch with her. We want her to know that we remember her, and her extraordinary contribution to our discipline. So I would recommend that maybe, Mary, when you put out the report from this meeting, maybe you could offer also Rosemary's address so that people could send her cards in Thanksgiving, particularly coming up to Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving for all she's done for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. I know you have been a very faithful friend to her throughout this whole period, and others of us as well have tried to be useful both to her and to her family as they deal with what must be just a terrible problem, imagining one of our greatest contributors unable to speak, unable to write, unable to communicate. So it is, you're absolutely right that she's no less a part of us. Anybody else with an announcement? Otherwise, I'm going to close the floor. Who else? Anybody have an announcement? Let me see. Susan, did you have one? No?
June, did
June
you
have
have one last? Yeah.
Yep, I just wanted to say about the arts. I mean, the role of the arts is basically to provide what's called heart's ease. The arts in the UK, I can't talk about anywhere else, but the performing arts are never going to be the same again. We're not going to return within the next 3 or 4 years to going to concerts, that sort of thing. And women traditionally have not played a huge part in the arts, particularly the sacred arts. We could, by having a conference in that area, be active in seeing what women can and so on, because I think the world, not only the world of theology, but the world of arts is changing beyond recognition. And women, for the first time in the arts, could have a hand in shaping it, because we've never had a real hand in shaping the arts. And we have a big chance. So I wanted to come in behind, you know, let's have a conference on the sacred, the arts, spirituality, because women have always done that privately in their own homes with their families. But we got a chance of doing it publicly and inventing new forms. And I think that's a huge possibility.
Thank you so much. Anybody else with the last comment? Otherwise, let me just take a quick look. I don't see it. Annalie, am I missing anybody? No, we're all set. I want to thank each and every one of you, and I want to thank in a particular way our speakers, Rita Nakashima-Brock here in the Greater Washington area, and Mary Condren in Dublin, Monica Maher in Quito, Ecuador, and Kath McPhillips, who is in the Sydney area, as it were, of Australia. And each of you brought something very unique. We would love to have those presentations and share them and socialize them if you are so inclined. So I'll be back in touch with you about that. That's one of the things that we try to do from this kind of conversation. I want to thank Annalie for technical assistance, and Diane for our support of the Water Office, and Elizabeth for co-chairing. And if you have further questions, comments, reflections, suggestions, please send them to us at waterstaff@hers.com. With that, I'm going to bring our meeting to a close, but leave our Zoom session open for those who would like to chit chat a bit longer. Again, with deep thanks to everybody. Have a wonderful day, those who are just starting your day, those who are in the middle of your day, and those who are ending your day. Have a wonderful time, and particularly be safe, be healthy.
And
Thanks,
I want to
guys.
thank Mary, because she really has done all the work for this meeting. So it's thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My pleasure. Water's
Thank
pleasure.
you.
One of our favorite projects. So the floor